welcome back to this episode of This Will Make You Happier. I am delighted to introduce my guest for today, Lana Camiel. She's a college professor, a drug information pharmacist, and an herbalist. She's the host of the podcast Wellness Insider Network. It's specially designed for young professionals and college students, but having followed the podcast myself, I know it's really great for everyone. Lana interviews healthcare experts, and she gets their most effective strategies to help you deal with stress and taking better care of yourself with the right food, herbal supplements, and self-care techniques. Lana lives in Boston with her husband and her furry family. Welcome, Lana, to This Will Make You Happier.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
I'd like to start off by just first a comment. I mean, you wear many hats. You're a college professor, drug information pharmacist, but you're also an herbalist. How did your journey in healthcare and herbalism and medicine start?
So when I'm an immigrant, I came from former Soviet Union, from Eastern Europe. When I was 16 years old, I came here to the United States, and it took me a little while to figure out what I want to do with my life. And when the decision was made, I followed the footsteps of my great-grandmother, and I became a pharmacist. And as I started my training in pharmacy school, the first year was especially challenging for me. It was a new culture, new language, new friends, just new experiences. Everything was very, very new. And I remember one day in August, before I was heading back to my second year of school, I was sitting and I was sobbing in my parents' bedroom, in my parents' apartment. And when they found me, they couldn't figure out what was going on. And so it took me a few years to actually understand why I was crying at that particular moment in time. I felt very much overwhelmed, and I felt that I didn't have much control in my life, and things were so difficult and so challenging, and yet I'm going back to school, I'm going back to studies, and even though I'm enjoying what I'm doing, it's still very tough. And so few years went by, I graduated, and I received my diploma, and I learned how to take care of patients with complex chronic illnesses and acute illnesses, but I was still having my own problems in terms of being stressed and overwhelmed and anxious. And I started realizing that I wanted to learn a little bit better and a little bit more about how to take good care of myself. And so I followed this path, and I started discovering variety of different techniques and variety of different modalities, and I fell in love with herbal medicine. So a few years went by, and I started learning from some of the best. So some of my teachers were David Winston and Rosemary Gladstar. And I know for the audience that is not familiar with these names, they don't really say much. But for people that are in this herbal community, these are our elders, and they are people that everyone is learning from. And so I'm hugely appreciative of this. And so during all this time, as I was learning how to take care of myself, I was working as a pharmacist, as a drug information pharmacist. And I ended up becoming a drug information pharmacist in a university setting. And so as I was teaching students in the university, in the pharmacy program, I started seeing that many of them were having similar problems and similar concerns, and that, that August day of crying in my parents' apartment started coming back to me more and more. And I started realizing that I was not alone in this journey, that I had a lot of students that probably could learn a thing or two and understand a little bit better of how to take care of themselves. And so this is how it kind of all started. And the journey still goes on. I'm still learning, and I'm still sharing this knowledge.
I have to just jump in and say that's first of all, so often we come to these alternative healing or practice or personal development through struggling with our own issues. So I love that you shared that piece of it. But also, it's just so true. Having been a college professor myself for many years, students today, even more than ever, are overwhelmed. They're overcommitted. They've got too much going on. They're carrying full course loads. They're working often more than one job to help pay, make ends meet, and they have that all important social life, right? So,
Of course.
I think that's such a perfect population to really focus on to help them deal with stress and overwhelm. But, now that I'm in midlife, I recognize that we still have stress and overwhelm. So, it's really something that we need to work on lifetime. It's a lifestyle issue. So tell us a little bit about what you do today. How do you share your knowledge now?
Sure. Sure. So as I mentioned, I teach college students. And so with time, I went from teaching only pharmacy specific courses to exploring some elective courses. And so there are a couple that I offer right now, in addition to all the requirements. So there is one that I'm running right now this semester that is called Complementary and Alternative Medicine. And so this is a course that allows students to experience a variety of different practitioners. So we talk together about sort of having introductory lectures on a variety of different disciplines, from chiropractic to acupuncture to herbal medicine to aromatherapy, you name it, homeopathy, naturopathic medicine. And then I invite different practitioners from the local different practitioners to talk about their own experiences. And so one of my goals with this course is for students to have a basic understanding of what these people do, and typically that there are many different modalities and there are many different things that they can recommend to their patients. Of course, I am training future healthcare professionals, but I also want them to pick up a couple of different disciplines that resonate the most with them, and recognize that, oh, when this course is over, maybe I'm going to go and schedule an appointment with a chiropractor, or maybe I'll check out a naturopathic physician. And every time there is a practitioner that comes, after the class is over, there are a couple of kids, and they're not kids, they're young men and women, but they come up and always asking for a card. And you can see that this particular approach or this particular modality or this particular philosophy has truly resonated with them. And so I really appreciate that. And so another course that I teach during the spring semester is about herbal supplements. And so I started learning herbs as a pharmacist. So it was all about books and resources and databases and how to read about all the adverse effects and interactions. And then when I started learning herbs from a perspective of herbalist, so started studying less from books, but more from actual people that are working with these plants, I realized they're like food, So these substances are so easy and should be incorporated in your everyday living. And so what I do during the spring semester is I actually get a huge delivery from one of the herbal companies, and distribute it between students. And so everyone gets like a little pack of chamomile and a little pack of peppermint and a little pack of, so there are like 15 or 20 different herbs, and they go home and they make different teas, and they report what they made, how it made them feel, what it tastes like, how can you make it taste better, and different things like that. And of course, they're learning about the mechanisms and interactions and various other more scientific and more left brain things. But I truly want them to experience, because one of my main goals is for them to really to feel and to learn about these substances and to understand that they should become a part of their life.
Wow. I've got so much I want to say about that. First of all, I wish as a student I'd been able to take courses like that. How exciting. But also how encouraging it is to know that at least some future healthcare providers are going to have that kind of knowledge, because we know that traditionally that's absent from the curriculum. So, wow, how exciting. And I also love how you don't just give them the teas and give them a list of this is what it does and how it does, but you actually ask them to explore on their own.
Yes.
So that's pretty exciting. Now, I've heard you speak before. I've listened to your podcast, and I know you talk about resilience. So I wanted to ask you, why is the topic of resilience so important to leading a happier life or reducing stress?
I think the topic of resilience became important to me when I started exploring my blog, my podcast, and I started asking my students different questions that relate to the topic. So I was asking them once again, how many of you feel overwhelmed? How many of you feel anxious? How many of it was just absolutely incredible to see that close to 85% of my students reported being overwhelmed. They're part of a very demanding program, and so I recognize this, but at the same time, the number of students that were complaining of anxiety and stress and inability to cope with this, and that was that last aspect of it, that many of them didn't know how to deal with this. That was the part that really made me pause and realize that all these lessons that I learned many, many years ago in my own life, that they are still incredibly relevant today. You were mentioning being a college professor and seeing students and recognizing that many of them deal with this, but I think millennials are especially affected by this. And so that's one of the reasons why mental health is becoming so important and such an important area of discussion. So resilience, we have a lot of different aspects, and I am actually doing some of my research, my scholarship is done in resilience and trying to understand what students are dealing with. And there are different aspects of it. So of course, if you got a bad grade, and how do you get back? How do you, get up and realize that maybe you need to shift something, maybe you need to adjust in one way or another, whether it is your study habits or something else. It's one thing, but when something more difficult is coming your way in your personal life, that sometimes that is much more difficult to handle. And I think this is one of the reasons why I appreciate that there is a lot more conversation that's going on, at least on college campuses, where we are looking at students and realizing you're handling a very busy school life, but at the same time you have a personal life, just like you mentioned, and you have to feed yourself. And so when one of these things is out of balance, or when something happens in one of these areas, the rest of it kind of like starts falling apart a little bit. And so the resilience, once again, is that ability to recognize that we're not perfect, and that's the beauty of us. We all learn based on our mistakes. Every single one of us makes mistakes. Every single one of us deals with hardship. And so it's, how do you handle it? And do you have strategies and tools that help you to overcome these? And I am not necessarily teaching my students how to study better or how to be more effective in terms of their time management skills. So, although all of these things are incredibly important, and I am continually learning about them, even in my own life. But what I talk to my students about is that there are 3 different components. One of them is food, one of them is herbs, and then the third one is self-care techniques. And all these different methods, they can be used incredibly well to support your health and well-being. And so all these other things that are happening around you, it's just a little bit easier for you to deal with them.
That's really valuable. I love that. So you talked about herbs and self-care. What was the first one?
Food, herbs, and self-care techniques.
Yeah. And again, it's not just so relevant to the college student population, but I love that you are focusing on them, because I think I've been neglected up until now. But I know that this is valuable to all adults dealing with stress and overwhelm. And I think most people would appreciate ways to reduce stress. So I want to ask you, let's zero in a little bit on herbs, the second part of your triad. What are some herbs that could help listeners reduce stress or overwhelm and thereby get to happier lives?
Of course. So I wanted to say it again.
Just a few favorites. I know you could go on and on about this for a month, but pick a few.
Okay, so first I actually wanted to tell you that I talk about students, but what I was very surprised by, I think initially, is realizing that a third of my podcast listeners is actually people in their 40s and 50s. And I was like, oh, this podcast is not like, it's attracting not only the young. So
Yeah.
because the lessons are so important to all of us. So you're absolutely right on that. So um, when I think about stress and when I think about being overwhelmed, I often think about a couple of different categories of plants. One of them is called nervines. And nervines are plants that they're food for your nervous system. And so there are many different ones, but I think the ones that I will mention today are two of my favorites. One of them is chamomile, and so many of us are familiar with celestial seasonings and their sleepy time tea. I usually get a little bit better quality of chamomile tea, and I'm happy to share some of the resources with your listeners of where to get them. But chamomile is this amazing plant. It's a queen of herbs in my mind, and I've written about it, and I absolutely love it. It's really powerful because it has a lot of different healing potential. So it's anti-inflammatory, it's really calming, it's really relaxing, but it's also incredibly gentle. And the reason why it's so, when we're thinking about chamomile, it's very often it's used for babies. And our babies, there are very few things that you would give to an infant or a newborn or a toddler with safe and comfort. And chamomile is one of those things that maybe not necessarily newborns, but toddlers, you can start giving them chamomile tea. And so once again, chamomile is very relaxing and very soothing. And this is the first herb that comes to mind when I think of someone who is anxious and who is stressing. And even if the Peter Rabbit, so we also know that when he came back home from the playground and he was bullied, what did mommy give him? Chamomile tea, right? So a cup of chamomile tea. So even our folklore reminds us that herbs are incredibly important. And so drinking a cup of really nice chamomile tea, whether it is in the evening with your dinner, I wouldn't recommend necessarily taking it right before you go to sleep because you'll have to wake up to go to the bathroom. But, earlier on, perhaps with your dinner is a really good idea. It helps you to transition from that busyness of the day to more relaxing and more calming state in your evening. So that's one of them.
So
Yep.
would you say like 2 hours before sleep, or are you just saying with dinner?
I would do it with dinner. I think with dinner is a good idea. So sort of like a transition. You can probably do it later than that. You can drink. There is like really. It's not about dosing. You get used to it. It's food, right? So chamomile, you wouldn't be selling it in the supermarket unless we were concerned and worried. So this is one of this like food grade herbs. So that's chamomile. The other one that I really like and that I think about often, and I carry actually a little bottle of it with me, is lavender. And so I carry essential oil of lavender, but you can find lavender in different tea blends and tea mixes, and so that's a really good one to be aware of and familiar with. The reason why I carry it in as an essential oil is because I like using it for a very, very fast and rapid um, way of de-stressing and calming yourself down very quickly and very easily. And I'll tell you a short story on this. I have a friend of mine that I traveled with, and I absolutely loved her. And but your best friends, you don't necessarily travel long distances with them most of the times, and so you still explore new facets of their personality when you get on this plane. So that happened to me. I didn't realize that my friend had panic attacks on the plane, and so once we got to our destination, we came back, and I was a very, very good traveler prior to that. I knew I could get on the plane, I could close my eyes and get up or wake up on the other side. And ever since we traveled together, it kind of like that anxiety, that the panicky state rubbed off on me. And so I started looking for something that would help me to deal with this. And somewhere in one of the lectures, someone mentioned lavender oil, and it just clicked. It made a lot of sense. So what I do now is when I travel, I put one little drop of lavender oil on my palm. I rub them together and I inhale. And so I inhale and I count to 4 or count to 10 or whatever it is that you want to. It relaxes you. It helps you to just, everything kind of like melts away. And I often, when I started actually exploring the lavender oil on its own, I started realizing that on one hand, it's very calming and relaxing. On another hand, it can help to focus you. And so I often recommend it for students that are studying. And once again, students is the audience that I mostly speak with, but anyone that wants to focus yet have this anxiety-free state, lavender is a really wonderful tool for them to be aware of. And so many things right now have lavender in them. So shampoos and conditioners and creams, but so we know and we're familiar with the smell of lavender. And so if you like it, if you are comfortable with it, I would highly recommend exploring that.
I love that story about how you use lavender to help with the panic attack. I just have to say that I'm like that as well. When I'm by myself, I travel, pretty happily, but my husband doesn't like to fly. And I know that traveling with him, it kind of rubs off on you. And I too keep a little lavender with me. So
very good.
So I love it. Okay, so chamomile and lavender. Do you have another favorite you'd like to share?
I do. So my third one, it's an Indian herb that is called holy basil or Tulsi. And so I heard about Tulsi or holy basil from many different people. And I started tasting it, and I realized how much I love and enjoy it. And so Tulsi is a little bit different. So the first two are nervine, so they're food for your nervous system. And this one is a category of plants that is called adaptogens. And so adaptogens, there are a number of them. There are about 9 well-studied and well-researched adaptogens, and Tulsi is being one of them. What adaptogen means is that it's a plant that affects you or supports your adrenal glands. So there is a whole cascade of reaction that happens in our body, but that support of the adrenal glands is incredibly important. And so the concept or the definition of adaptogens is that it's plants that helps you to resist the stress of daily living. And so the reason why I really love Tulsi is because it's a plant that is in a mint family. And mints like peppermint and spearmint and various other ones, they're very safe, they're very effective, they grow very rapidly, so they are easy. And we actually so people started growing it here locally. So we are in Massachusetts, and so there are places in Vermont and places in Western Massachusetts that grow Tulsi. And I really love the smell of the plant, and I love the way it makes you feel, and it's just so pleasant and so nice and so relaxing. What's also important about it is that there are some companies that make blends with Tulsi. So you can find tea bags of Tulsi in supermarkets under the company's name Organic India, and I wish I had financial ties with them, considering how often I recommend them, but I absolutely love them. I do not have any financial connection to them. But I love the tea, and my favorite is the mix with roses. So they have sweet rose and they have few other ones, but the idea is that you can have that cup of Tulsi tea on a daily basis, and it's once again something that is very grounding, something that helps you to support the health of your adrenal glands, and something that's very calming. And it's a great ritual, having that cup of tea, whether it is in the morning or putting it in your thermos and carrying it with you. And my students always say, what's in your thermos? So very often Tulsi is going to be in my thermos.
Great. Yes. And you actually turned me on to the India tea and that sweet rose. It is one of my favorite teas. And so not only is it good for you to help you de-stress and prevent getting overwhelmed, but it's also tastes good, right?
Yes, it tastes fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
Well, this is wonderful. Chamomile, lavender, Tulsi. It's so great to know that there are things we can do to help deal with the stresses in life. Now, if listeners wanted to learn more, because I know that there are so many more herbs and other things they could do, what would you recommend if they wanted to learn about health and wellness, especially via food and herbs?
Of course. So before we move forward, I actually wanted to say something. I'm a pharmacist, as you know, and as a pharmacist, I also, despite the fact that I believe that these three plants are really safe and really mild and really gentle, I want to make sure that the audience, your listeners, and your viewers realize that they need to learn a little bit more about these plants and read a little bit more about them, because certainly when we are giving these recommendations, we really don't know their personal medical histories or anything else that they're taking on their own. So if there are interactions and things of that type. So any recommendation that you get anywhere on the web, really you need to look at them, like put a little bit closer look at them, realizing your personal situation is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
that's a great point. I just want to jump on there also,
sure.
because sometimes I'll have this conversation with, for example, my mother. I'll recommend something for her herb to help her with something she's dealing with, and she'll say, well, I should clear it with my doctor first. And I'm thinking, your doctor probably never heard of this herb, and they really don't know. and that's what I'm thinking, is like there's this big disconnect between conventional medicine and alternative forms of medicine and wellness. And that's why I'm so excited to know that at least your students are going to know something about it, right? So that when someone asks, they'll have a little more information. But the other thing I just wanted to add also is that, even though things are food, different people can have different reactions to it. We know that, for example, people on certain medicines aren't supposed to eat grapefruit, or if you end up having a nut allergy, you can go to the supermarket, buy grapefruits and nuts, and probably a myriad other things that are going to affect you. If you have kidney issues, you have to stay away from spinach and dark greens. So I think that's a really good point, that even though things are food, and they can have a beneficial effect on you, to be aware that our body is a system and to be mindful of that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I also want to mention something. So I wasn't planning to give this information to your audience, but I think it probably is a good idea. So as a pharmacist, I run a drug information center. And so I usually have a couple of students that are working with me. And so most of the times, I think that talking to your pharmacist about specific plants, they at least know where to go for resources. But if your pharmacist doesn't know, or if your physician doesn't know, we have a Center for Drug Information and Natural Products, and you're welcome to reach out to us, because we help healthcare professionals, but we also help the lay public. And so we get questions about interactions or about adverse effects. And so my students usually work on the questions, and I usually sign off on them and kind of like do the double checking. And so you can go to the mcphs.edu website, and there is information on how to find Center for Drug Information and Natural Products. And
I can put the link here on this page too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we will be happy to provide you with additional information or answer your questions. We won't be able to provide clinical recommendations, but we will be able to tell you what's in the literature, if there are specific interactions between certain things that you are taking and perhaps something that you are considering taking.
Great, thank you.
Sure. And so your question about where to start. So there are many different places today. And so I think that for someone that is very new to herbal medicine, one of my favorite resources is learningherbs.com, and you're pretty familiar with them. And so it's a group of several practitioners. So there is an acupuncturist there is a wonderful herbalist there are a few wonderful herbalists there. And so what they do is they help you to really understand understand how to start with herbal medicine, how to make some of these things, perhaps how to make your first tea, or how to make your first decoction, or how to make your very first salve or first syrup. They also have a wonderful resources that they share on all over social media. There are many different places that you can explore for actual purchasing herbs and supplements. I'll start with herbs. Once again, one of my favorite is Mountain Rose Herbs. And so it's a company out of Oregon. And I really love the quality of the herbs that they carry. They're distributors. So they buy from different places all around the world. They really vet the quality of the plants that come into their facility. And so they pretty much offer the herbs to anyone that will contact them. Many of the people that call are practicing clinical herbalists, but there are also people that, like, probably many of your listeners that are just starting. And so this is a really good one to be familiar with. And there are also a few different books that are out there. Anything by Rosemary Gladstar, I think, is a really, really good start. And so she is sort of like a grandmother of herbal medicine right now, and she's amazing. I loved studying with her, and anything that she has written is really a wonderful introduction. I am happy to put together some of these resources and to provide them to your audience, and so perhaps we can also do that if you would like.
That would be great. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And so look on here on the show notes, and I'll have a link there.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for this. And I have to say that you introduced me to learning herbs, and I love it. But what's the part that maybe people don't know is that it's also a lot of fun. It's kind of like
It really is.
a little chemistry. I don't know. You're cooking, making concoctions. So I had a lot of fun learning about herbs. Thank you so much, Lana. This has been so valuable because I know everyone is dealing with stress and overwhelm. And to know that there are things, simple things, even good tasting things that we can do is pretty empowering and exciting.
And thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone. That's all for today, and see you next time for This Will Make You Happier.